Hello and welcome to K-Pod, the podcast about Korean Americans and arts and culture from Korean American Story. I'm Catherine Hong, a writer and editor.
And I'm Juliana Sohn, a photographer.
Today we are filming our final episode of K-Pod. It has been 5 years and this is our 35th episode.
You know, I think when we started the podcast, we really thought we need something like this out here. There was a podcast that I love called Pod Save the People, and it was Black activists. And I remember I emailed HJ and I said, we need something like that for Korean Americans. I just love how specific it was and educated me on issues I wasn't aware of. And I thought HJ would have been the perfect person to do this. And then he turned around and said, I've been dying to do a podcast and I think you'd be the perfect host, which was not what I was expecting. But I thought about it and then I thought, you know, I just need to try something new, a new challenge. And I wanted to do it with Catherine because I thought you would help flesh out the parts that I wasn't so confident about.
I don't think we heard enough stories about Korean Americans, but it was something that Juliana and I were always so curious to learn a little more about the lives of people that we read about.
Absolutely. I think, you know, because Catherine and I both have magazine backgrounds, we had pitched a fair number of stories where we were trying to get more Asian Americans into mainstream media. And there were always like misses. And they said, oh, we love it, but it never really quite, they never ran the story. And I think K-Pod was the perfect vehicle for us to be able to have in-depth conversations and conversations that, you know, didn't need to satisfy the kind of like design and arts culture so much. Like we could delve into the stories and, you know, ask them questions that they don't normally get asked.
So what I loved was getting to interview a creative person and not just hear about the work, but hear about what did your parents think when you chose to be an artist? Or,
absolutely.
You know, what were your childhood memories or, you know, even how good is your Korean? I'm always interested in knowing like how Korean are a lot of these Korean Americans. You know, are their families like mine or are they, you know, different kinds of families? And
you know, my favorite interviews were when, you know, like Jim Lee, he was so generous to say, you know, I can give you like an hour of my time. And we spent so much time, I think, setting up. And then he realizes this isn't a typical interview like he's had. And we're asking him questions about his parents and his childhood. And there are things that he hasn't even thought about in so long. We're talking about his daughter who lives in Korea and her Korean being, you know, is now better than his. And he didn't want to go.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Jim was a special case because he's such a celebrity in the world of comic books. But I think a lot of that audience is a bunch of white dudes who are mostly interested in his work as an artist, but they're not that interested in him as a person. And we are so interested in everything about his prep school background to
his parents, his kids.
Yeah, so we take it in a different way. Anyway, we've met so many amazing people through this podcast and I feel connected to them still, even if I don't talk to them. But when I see them on Instagram or I hear about their next projects, I just feel so much more connected. And I genuinely have really enjoyed everyone we've spoken with.
You know, Jason Kim,
who's a screenwriter for Girls, and he wrote the book for K-Pop, the Broadway show.
And we were so moved hearing his story about his father being ill and how it brought them closer together. And then, meeting Jason, we forged a connection and I was able to actually meet his parents and photograph their legacy portraits. You know, the podcast kind of brought us together.
Yeah. Also, that was one of my favorite episodes. We laughed so hard during that. I mean,
and he cried.
Yeah.
We laughed and cried.
Was great. Yeah. He was A+ guest. Well, speaking of other guests that have really stuck with me, one of our guests from the very first season is G. Lee, who is a creative director. He had worked at Google and Facebook.
Saatchi and Saatchi.
But what was inspiring about him, I'm sure you'll agree, is he had this philosophy, life philosophy, that you have to pursue creative work that is meaningful to you. And
personal
it does
projects.
not have to be, it should, usually the best work that you do is not for your job. And he did a lot of personal projects, art projects, kind of mischievous pranks around town, or Instagram projects featuring his parents. And those are the projects that got him the most accolades.
Absolutely.
That meant the most to him and have really defined his career. And he really inspired me to think about doing work that I found personally meaningful. And it's true that when you pursue what is personally meaningful to you, that's your best work.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
you have to make time for it, and you have to be brave and do what you want to do.
Yeah.
That has really stuck with me.
Well, you know, the guest that I think I quote more than anyone is Young-ha. She's this fabulous interior designer, and I asked her a question about beauty and how necessary is, you know, good design or luxury, because I'm somebody who can be very skeptical about things that are like, you know, don't have a function.
Or sometimes it feels self-indulgent, or we worry that
Yeah.
it's a luxury for the privileged to
Yes.
care about beauty.
And I had asked her about beauty, and her answer just really made me think about taking care of yourself and why beauty is important in your life. And it's made me realize that beauty is not a luxury, and beauty does not have to be expensive. It could be anything that you find joy in, that makes your day or your life just a little bit more pleasant.
Yeah. And speaking of Young-ha, another way I think this podcast has kind of opened new doors for me is after we interviewed her and got to know her better, she was starting to explore more of her Korean American identity. And not too long ago, she became one of the founding members of a group called APADA, which is the Asian American Pacific Islander Design Alliance. And it's the first kind of industry group of Asian Americans coming together to become a support group for each other. It's to, you know, promote Asian Americans in design and architecture, which they haven't really had much of a voice.
Absolutely. One of their main focal points is mentoring younger people to bring them up. And they have these wonderful events that you go, and it's, you know, like support, networking, great conversation, information.
So, right, exactly. And now I've been helping out with some events for them, and I do feel like a part of this community in a way that I don't think I really felt officially somebody who could represent. Now it's funny because I still think of myself as someone very much raised in white culture, yet my work doing K-Pod has given me kind of a weird new position in the world, where, you know, I'll be asked to attend a Korean fashion show, or I don't know, people have me on their radar as someone, which is it's kind of a joke because I'm not that I still think I'm not Korean enough, but I love feeling that I'm part of this world. And then sometimes Juliana and I will be somewhere, and people will come up to us and say, "Hey, you guys host K-Pod. We listen to your podcast," which always floors me.
Yeah. There have been several instances where I've connected with people who are podcast listeners on Instagram, or I meet them out in real life. And it makes me so thankful that there are listeners out there, but it also makes me really thankful because I feel connected, like they've heard our thoughts and our questions, and kind of been with us through these, you know, as we're learning. And about our identity and our community. I always think it's really interesting. Pretty much everyone we've interviewed has said, I don't feel Korean enough. And I don't know if it's, our parents or, kind of like trying to reinforce our culture, but it's like, what is this like uber Korean we all have in our heads? Are they like always eating kimchi and fluent in Korean and always, like so deferential to their elders? And I think that's the thing that I really appreciate about this podcast and being able to host it is that we've spoken with so many Korean Americans. And as being the host, we're in this position of saying, oh, no, you are Korean American enough. Right. You are enough. And in order to be able to do that, I think I've had to think, well, I have to be enough.
Yeah, that reminds me of something I feel like I learned from Eric Kim, the food writer, who basically says that authenticity is bullshit.
Absolutely.
And the idea is that if you lived an experience, that's a truth. Mm-hmm. And it can't be discounted because it wasn't authentic enough, because you actually lived it. Maybe you cooked a dish a certain way and your parents used the ingredients that were around. Exactly. That was authentic to your family. You're Korean American, and that's how you cooked it. Yeah. So nobody can say that's not real. Yeah. It's real if you lived it. And same for your life experience. I'm certainly Korean. My parents are Korean. I grew up feeling a little different and always knowing I was Korean American. But I've come to feel like the experience I've had is just as valid as someone else's experience. Who is more Korean,
Well, the experience of diaspora Koreans is that our parents have this arrested development where they're trying to hold on to traditions and they don't evolve because they're trying to be true to a time that they remember. Whereas I think the Koreans in Korea, they evolve and they keep changing. And I love that there's almost like a rebound of like Korean influence coming in, and whether it be cuisines or whatever it is, that there's a mixing of cultures going on that has arrived in America, and you can see it a lot in food. But I love that. I love seeing, not only just the traditional kinds of Korean dishes that you see in Korean restaurants, but that they're tackling all sorts of different kinds of foods.
Yeah.
I mean, there was an article that just came out in the New York Times that we were talking about recently, talking about hand hospitality. The gorgeous photos were shot by Janice Chung, who is part of the Korean American Story family. And the kind of restaurants that they profiled are Korean restaurants, but they're like Korean, but not all restaurants in Korea are only going to do kimchi jjigae. So I love that we have that breadth of like diversity of authentic Korean chefs who are making, food that they feel good about, and they just happen to be Korean chefs.
Speaking of food, I was also recently thinking about how it's a shame that we only were able to interview one person who's like half Korean, Michelle Zauner of Japanese Breakfast. Because multiracial. Because that's something I was always fascinated by as a kid. The halfies, as I would think of them. And, Juliana and I both have children who are half Korean, half white, and that there's so much to discuss there. Their experience. There's so many multiracial Koreans now.
Absolutely.
And so I loved hearing her perspective. I wish that there are some guests that I feel like if we did continue this episode, we would have loved to have had. And I would have loved to have had some more multiracial Koreans, some adoptees. Mm-hmm. So, Juliana, I have a question for you. Who would you have liked to have interviewed? Who did we not get a chance to interview? Was there someone on your list?
Oh, I know we pursued Kathy Park Hong.
Who we did meet at an event, but we never got to interview her.
Yeah, so she was a big one. And I know this is is it Bernard Lee, who was a car designer for Tesla early on?
Yeah.
We tried really hard to get him.
Yeah, at one point he thought he could do it, but
Yeah.
maybe he wasn't allowed to.
I know. He was in between jobs, and then once he started working back at Tesla, I think maybe he wasn't allowed to.
One guest that I actually wished we had gotten, this would have been a dream, is Sandra Oh. Because nobody ever obviously thinks I look like anybody, but I can't tell you how many times strangers have come up to me and said, "Are you on that TV show? Are you the doctor?" And for the longest time, I didn't even know what they were talking about because I never watched Grey's Anatomy. And then I found out that Sandra Oh and I have the same exact birthday. And so, anyway, she's my spirit celebrity. And one day I hope to meet her, love her. Just want to say that. Kathy Park Hong, you know, I've been obsessed with her for many years because we have such similar names. And I knew her really as a poet.
Yeah.
You know, before she wrote Minor Feelings, which was such a sensation.
Well, we were lucky enough to attend a reading that Marie Myung-Ak Lee organized at Columbia. Small room, and there were some phenomenal writers there. And I'd never heard of Kathy Park Hong, and she read an excerpt from Minor Feelings before it was published there. And we were so blown away. We were like, this is going to be huge.
Right, and
we asked her to be a guest on the spot.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, after playing email tag for a while, it just didn't happen.
I think she got a little bit too much in demand. She was everywhere.
Yes.
And actually that brings us back to why are we ending K-pop? I think one of the great things that's happened is that there has been a lot more opportunity for Korean Americans to be in the media. I mean,
Asian Americans in general.
Right. It's only been 5 years since we've been doing this podcast, and it was starting back then. But now, God, there are Korean Americans everywhere. They're doing great.
You know, I think it's remarkable in the 5 years since we started K-pop.
K-pop. We founded K-pop.
It's remarkable in the 5 years that we started K-pop, how visible Asian Americans in culture and media have become.
Yeah.
You know, from winning Academy Awards, Parasite, Beef just won a bunch of awards, got nominated.
Kathy Park Hong was on the cover of Time magazine. That was really humiliating for me. People were saying, "Hey, was that you on the cover?" Right.
So, and also, I think there are so many more outlets where, you know, people can go and get interviewed, and they can ask similar questions about heritage and your immigrant story. There are a lot of other podcasts out there, and I think that I don't feel that we need to put K-pop out anymore with the same kind of need and urgency that I felt that we needed to back in 2018.
Oh, speaking of episodes we never got to record, one that I really was interested in doing was we were trying to organize a special episode about mental health. And we had these two great therapists, Dr. Jacob Ham and Dr. Michelle Chung. I had a million questions about why Korean Americans have been so, or Korean immigrants have been so reluctant to enter therapy or even utter the word shrink or psychiatrist, to a lot of the issues our community has that are deep-seated. It's fertile territory, which actually takes us to what we should mention. Korean American Story is going to be focusing on in the coming years, which is
a lot of the stories that center around trauma and generational trauma.
Finding healing through telling stories.
Exactly.
Which is really the essential mission of Korean American Story.
When we were talking about Michelle Zauner, you know, Catherine and I both have multiracial kids, and I don't know when kids start thinking about their identity or questioning it. I think often it's around college. But my son, who's 17, took an Asian American literature class senior year. And his teacher, Miss Mong, is just fantastic. And she had all these texts, like Kathy Park Hong was one of them, that really made the kids have to grapple with and think about their identity. And, Emmett was maybe like one of like 2 or 3 multiracial kids, and everyone else was fully Asian in the class. And he really struggled. He's like, I just don't see myself in the class. I don't see myself reflected in the literature. One of the lines in Kathy Park Hong's Minor Feelings is, if I don't feel shame, am I even Asian American? And he said, Mom, I don't feel shame. Does that mean I'm not Asian American? And there's a part of me that it was like really upset. And I thought, you are a young person growing up in one of the most diverse cities in the world. And your mom felt so much shame at your age that she worked damn hard to make sure that you never had to go through that. And now, because you've had this existence that has been carefully, I've been very careful that you didn't have to go through what I did. Now he's wondering, am I Asian American? And I said, you know what? Kathy Park Hong is wonderful. She resonates with me, but she's my age. And she is not a 17-year-old kid. And so I said, maybe you need to start thinking about, what resonates with you. And there's got to be other works out there that you can check out. And his teacher recommended Michelle Zauner's Crying in H Mart. So he read the story in The New Yorker. He thought that she was amazing. And then he was blown away to hear that we had interviewed her.
Oh, yeah.
So for his final project, he did a presentation on multiracial identity. And, she was one of the people that he had cited. And it is the only episode that my son has listened to.
No, my kids do not listen. I don't blame them. But what I think is funny is that since we've been doing this for 5 years, in their mind, this is all mommy does. They think anytime they see a Korean person on TV, they say, "Oh, do you know her? You must know her." No, I don't. Or anytime I talk about interviewing someone, they think I'm interviewing I must be interviewing a Korean person. It's kind of funny.
I don't know. I have to say, I have felt a little bit sheepish saying, oh yeah, after we interviewed Ashley Park, she kind of like blew up in Emily in Paris, and now she's huge. And then, we love Peter Sohn. So we had him on, and a lot of people hadn't heard of him, and he's so
the Pixar
fantastic.
director.
Yeah, he's so fantastic, and now he's nominated for an Oscar for Elemental. So I'm just like, when people say, "Oh, have you heard of Peter Sohn?"
Love that guy. We love him. Yeah.
But I think there have been like maybe one too many times where I've said, oh yeah, I interviewed him for the podcast. So I can't say that I think I've gotten to be a better interviewer in the 5 years that we have been hosting K-Pod. I think during the pandemic, when we went on Zoom, and, I got COVID early on, I don't know that I ever really recovered my articulation. Like, I find it still really hard to pull words out and put into complete articulate, like, sentences what I want to say.
Really?
And it's been really challenging for me.
You think you have long-term COVID?
I still have like nerve ending like kind of issues every now and again that I can feel like very slight. I don't really have long COVID in like the way that a lot of people experience it. But I do think that I feel a little, I don't know, maybe it's just age. Maybe I've always been inarticulate.
No, I think you're so articulate. Thank God. I try to let you do most of the talking.
But the other thing that I've learned is I've always had issues with pronunciation, and I've always thought that I had a Korean accent. And I know people think I'm crazy, but when people speak another language, there are certain like inflections that you have like Korean, like English is not my first language. And I can hear it in the podcast when we do our edit. And somebody pointed out that I have a lisp. And I do.
But that's not related to Korean.
No. I think it's just,
Do you?
you know, I think I do.
I don't think I ever noticed that.
So anyway, I've gotten so much out of doing K-Pod, but I don't know that it's ever been quite easy for me to put myself out there.
Me neither.
And so I'm going to be a little relieved to not have that stress. It has been a great outlet though.
Yeah.
For exploring and talking to and, you know, getting to know people that I would never have met otherwise.
Absolutely. I've met many, many people who I never would have met. And also the whole group at Korean American Story, which is an amazing organization. It is like a family.
Mm-hmm.
They took a chance on us and they supported us.
Absolutely.
And they made it all possible.
Yeah.
So maybe we should mention some of the people who've helped us make K-Pod.
Yeah. Kevin Park, we still think about you and talk about you and miss you.
Yes. And Young Sun, who's here now, who is filming us and helps us with all the recordings and
she does
setting everything up,
just
organizing.
Amazing.
A great producer. Mm-hmm. We also had Deb Beck, who we miss.
Deb is in Korea right now being bossed around by her harmony.
Okay, all right, Deb. And we also had the help of
Jessica
Park. Yes. Yeah. Early on, she helped us with a lot of our early episodes. We have a phenomenal editor, AJ Valente, not a Korean, but honorary, who makes everything sound good and
absolutely
cuts out all the bad stuff. And of course, HJ.
Mm-hmm.
HJ Lee, the co-founder of
and president of Korean American Story.
Right.
I think when people say, "Oh, you know, how did you end up doing a podcast?" and it's because somebody like HJ has a vision and takes a chance on someone like me, who has always been behind the camera and never only visuals. I'm not actually even sure why he thought it was a good idea. But I'm glad that he did and pushed me out of my comfort zone. It is one of those situations where I sat on the fence thinking, oh, how would I ever do this? But there was a part of me that thought you just need to get up and try.
Yeah.
So I'm glad. I'm glad. Thank you.
Let's talk about what's next.
Okay. Wait. Before we talk about what's next, you know, Catherine and I have known each other since we were in high school and very close friends. But doing this podcast, you know, one of the things that I was looking forward to when we decided to do this podcast together was that I would be forced to spend more time with you. And I thought, oh, that'd be great. You know, I get to hang out with and work with and, you know, get to know Catherine better. And we have, and it's made us closer. But the thing that I find so fascinating is that you and I have such vastly different upbringings and backgrounds. And, you know, your parents, their lifestyle and my parents and their background, it's so fascinating to me. You know? I
agree. And it's kind of representative of the show where we've learned that Korean Americans have totally different experiences, even from being Catholic to being Protestant.
I think
running a shop to being a doctor. I mean,
and speaking only Korean at home and only eating Korean food growing up to not speaking Korean at home. Of course, interviewing all the people on the podcast made me realize that we all have very different, you know, lives and upbringings. But actually talking to you and, you know, meeting your parents and hearing your stories and even the way we approach guests, and especially, I think it came out especially in the Korean traditional medicine episode, where we really approached it from vastly different viewpoints. It's now that this that we're, you know, closing down shop and ending the podcast. What are you up to? What are your next? I mean, we've both been very busy leading freelance lives, hustling and doing other projects. But what do you have coming up, or what are you excited for?
Right now, I have 5 or 6 regular clients, magazines, and editorial outlets where I write similar types of stories every month. And I think I'm going to try to take some time, say no to some assignments, and with that time, try to do some personal writing. I've said this for many years, I know, but I think this year, 2024, I really am going to take on fewer of those freelance assignments, which pay some of the bills, but I make so little money freelancing them. I might as well use that time and do work that feels meaningful to me. So that's my goal for 2024.
Well, maybe
to do
we
more
can
personal
collaborate
writing
on a book. It's time for a Catherine book.
It's true. It might be time for a book. And what about you, Juliana? Tell us about the flowers.
Okay. For those of you who've been, following me on Instagram, firstly, I'd like to say, yes, I am still a photographer. I still take pictures. But my Instagram feed has been populated with all these paper flowers that I started making last summer. I started making paper flowers because I wanted to do something new and different and creative that was much more hands-on. My photography, it's become a lot more digitized. So I shoot, a digital camera, and my workstation is a monitor and a Wacom tablet. So, in making paper flowers, it's very hands-on and tactile. There's, watercolors, pastels, glue, lots of scissors, and it's been this really wonderful experience where I get to create something that is tangible, and an explosion of color, ruffles and frills, and this fringe that just makes me feel really it just kind of wells up a part of me that goes, oh, it's so pretty. And this is where I think of some of Young He's beauty for beauty's sake. I love the idea of having something beautiful next to your bed. So you look at something beautiful right before you go to sleep, and then the first thing you see when you wake up is something beautiful. And so that's my only intention in making these paper flowers. I just really enjoy this craft. And, it's not something that's ever going to be displanted by AI, like my photography
or my writing. I better learn how to make something.
So thank you to all our listeners who, some of you have come up to me and said you listen to every episode, which, wow, thank you.
All our podcasts are still available to be downloaded from KoreanAmericanStory.org. You can go back and listen to our very first episode if you like.
We've learned so much, and we've gotten so much out of talking to our guests, and I hope you have had too. And I hope it inspires you to, ask these questions and talk to people in your lives, whether it be your parents or grandparents. What's important is to ask those questions.
Thanks, everyone, for listening, and please stay in touch.
Yeah, you can follow us on our respective social media accounts. On Instagram, I'm at Juliana_Sohn.
And I'm Catherine Hong 100. And don't forget Juliana's Paper Flowers account,
which is at Pirly, Pirrly. And I don't think that this is going to be the absolute end of our association with Korean American Stories. So hopefully there will be some special projects in the future.
Okay.
2, 3.
감사합니다.
And then you
안녕. Because I fighting.
Oh yeah.
Actually, I think that's.
Do it at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't even know how to do
You
that.
go. Okay.
Like this.
Finger hearts.
Finger heart.
Oh, we learned this from Kang Hee, one of our guests. Remember? Finger hearts.
감사합니다.
감사합니다.